ongoing support.
I'd just like to see the true costs of what it is to us for that track, because it was meant to be gifted to us by central government when it was instigated, and now here we are paying huge colossal amount of money. I don't understand this at all.
If I can just follow that up, Mr. Wells. So there's $1 million, if you like, has been spent by council. Is that $1 million recovered from anywhere, or is that council's contribution to the capital cost of extending, improving the Alteration Trail?
It's council's cost. I think at the outset of the project, there may have been an expectation that there would be revenue gathered by the operators of tourist ventures along the way. I'm not sure whether that has actually happened in reality, whether that funding has been perhaps become revenue for Tourism Waitaki or other agencies, or perhaps has not arrived at all. I can't say.
I think I can perhaps answer that question for you. It hasn't arrived at this stage due to some difficulties in deciding how that can be achieved, how those costs can be achieved. So yeah. But just a follow-up question. So that million spent by council, that was all in the Waitaki district, I assume, not in the Mackenzie district?
Oh yes. Yes, no, all we're paying for is construction within our district, although that is something like two-thirds or three-quarters of the length of the track.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I'm not happy with that answer. I just cannot understand how we're spending that much money.
So would you like a more detailed report?
Yeah. So appreciate that.
Outlining those 2 years spent in the funding, because there are other funding sources that
Yes.
we'll just specify those.
Thank you, Mr. Hope. That would be appreciated. So, Councillor Holding.
I just got the explanation of the contributory causes why we want to get it, but then we don't have all the amounts. Are we looking backwards to fill the gaps of those missing, or are we going to give us some flexibility looking forward as well?
That's when we first wrote the funding with the LGFA, certainly indicated in that original report, we thought the initial funding, so 15 million, would last a bit longer. So it would last at least into sort of the first quarter of the 21 year. Really what the explanation there is, that's how we've used that funding a bit quicker than anticipated. So things like the reservoir where for that expenditure, so we're carrying more of that now. That's essentially why that money's run out. We used up earlier, but really the 10 million is very much looking ahead. As explained, covered in the report, using paying off an overdraft that we've been using on and off over the last few months, and providing for the additional capex that we're for this year. It's got about time.
All right, so do you just want to go through the report? Let's look at it page by page and things that arise. So 15 is,
Sorry, Chair, look, just another question in relation to what Guy asked before. If we're going to do a cash analysis of this cost, which is almost a 2-year period, we really need to do a comparative on the benefit the district's got out of that extra million that we've had to spend, which might be quite substantially more, I suggest, than the million that's the net million that's cost us. So I think that to get a fair picture, we need to know what that benefit is.
yeah, I think my feeling, Councillor Gray, thanks for raising that. I think my feeling is really to see, look, have a look and see which budget, make sure that where that money came from. But you're quite correct. There is an overall benefit, an economic development benefit in the region, which probably is very hard to gauge, very hard to measure. But we all know this. Anyway, no, I think Mr. Hope offered to bring back a report on that. So
we'll discuss that question with Mr. Point and see what information we might have available.
So 15, page 16.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just referring back to that, the need to borrow, etc., cash flows and so on. Have we got the second $3.5 million for the tranche 1 funding from Canterbury that was allocated to the region, and then further divided up by the region to say that we get another 3.5 million?
So we expect that early in the new financial year. Indications are that we won't have spent all of the monies that we've already received until towards the end of June or start of July. We won't receive them until that is one of the contributing factors to the need to borrow short term, because we must spend that money, but it's not currently in our bank account. Yes.
Yeah, no, I wondered if that might be contributed.
Well, thank you, Mayor Kircher. Right, so page 16, I think we're pretty much covered, the background page. And then 17, loans to external parties, term deposits, there are some at the present time, which is a bit of a surprise. 18 is the old government funding authority, the structure of the loans, plus the overdraft from the BNZ at the time. And then a paragraph on future requirements. And then coming down to a chart which sets out the cost of borrowing at the present time, the cost of borrowing all from the LGFA, an extra 10 million, showing that the cost of borrowing an extra $10 million is $184,950 per annum.
No, sorry, no, that's the total.
Oh.
So what?
Sorry,
saying?
sorry, Mr. Wells, you're quite right.
Yeah.
Sorry, the 184,950. It's 177,950 at the present time, so it's $7,000.
Now that assumes a few things. It assumes that the new funding from the LGFA is at 1%, which may be high or it may be low. It also assumes that we will continue to place surplus funds when they're available on term deposit at present rates, which are about 0.35%. So a lot of variable factors in that, but it provides an indication that we don't burden the ratepayer with too great additional cost.
Yeah, I think the point you made, Mr. Wells, is quite correct, 1%, whereas the chart above on page 18, shows there's not one rate which is up at 1%, they're all below 1%.
So if we can get Bancorp to structure that in a most opportune way, then we can save a lot more than that.
Yeah. Right, thank you, Mr. Wells, for that correction of what I was reading out. All right, so that brings us to the end of the report. There's no other questions. So would someone like to move the recommendations on page, back again, page 15? Here to remove that. You have to move Mayor Kircher. Seconded. I'll second those. Oh. Yeah. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? We'll declare that carried. So the
Chair, that vote was around the increase from of $10 million. It wasn't around the investigation of the standby facility as well, which we discussed here.
No, that was the whole thing.
the whole thing. Yep. Yep. Okay, so zipping on to page.
Sorry, did you have a question about the standby facility?
Oh no, I just wondered whether it was worth explaining the terms of quite high sort of standby fees and stuff that you're paying. It's a good example of where you go through a process and make some quite strong efficiency gains.
Yeah, I think it's the LGFA keeps evolving as an organisation, and the products that they're offering to the local government community. They've now expanded to allow council-controlled organisations to borrow from them. So that's information that we've passed on to Whitestone Contracting as a possible option for them. And also the standby facility is something else that a number of member councils had been interested in. And so again, it's a product they've created in response to requests from the borrowers/shareholders.
Right, Mayor Kircher?
So does that extend the ability to borrow from the LGFA? Does that extend from CCOs through the groups?
I'd have to ask the LGFA that. Yeah.
Seeing, we've got the downside of requirement for the hospital. there might be a silver lining. So anyway,
Yep.
you can find that out.
Yeah, I will do.
Good thought. There you go. Okay, so we'll move on to memorandum reports. 5.1 financial report, once authorised by Mr. Hope, written by Mr. Wells. Are either of you two gentlemen? Number of appendices attached to that.
Yeah,
I'll make a very overall comment, and Ian can make something a bit more specific. I think overall, very happy with the position we've actually got to at the 3/4 point. When we set the annual plan, there were still an awful lot of uncertainties around the impact of COVID, both on the economy and on council itself. I was probably at the time, I think I warned that the result is likely to potentially be no resemblance to the budget we've just passed, because we didn't know what was going to happen with user charges, what was going to happen with penalties, what the economy would do, the level of really rates payments the community could afford. That's why council put in place a number of measures to actually mitigate against that. So I think to be in the position we're in, to see particularly that the activity in the building consent and resource consent area is very positive, and really the overall result, I think we could have been facing something far worse. So to be at this point and have a pretty positive outlook for the 3 months to the end of the year, it's certainly better than I think we probably anticipating about when the annual plan was set sort of 10 months ago. That's just an overall comment, and then Mr. Wells.
So on page, so you may think it's odd that we're referring to an operating deficit of almost $2 million as a good situation, but when you consider the budget for this first 9 months at $3.5 million deficit, it is an improvement, and we're heading in the right direction. There's still $2.3 million of tranche 1 of the money to be brought to account. Of course, it means we have to spend it, which again harks back to the Treasury strategy around the additional borrowing. You'll see also that we have, or at least the Friends of the Ops to Ocean have secured a grant of $177,000 from the Community Trust towards a bridge on the Ops to Ocean. There are other sources of funding aside from council, and I should have mentioned that earlier in the discussion. We're also sitting on $250,000 in income in advance towards the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs project, which we're administering the funding for. That will eventually become our funding, but will also be costs associated. I guess, though, that I'll wait for questions. There's quite a lot of information in here. The majority of the numbers are in our favour. The ones that aren't are in the financial income area, where our interest is from investments and from loans to third parties is under budget, as to be expected given low interest rates and given the fact that we have been struggling to invest money when we've had it. It's risky to invest it for too long, so we've been getting interest rates of 0.3%, 0.4%, better than the call account of 0.05%, which is virtually nothing, but still not 0.9%, which I could get for 12 months. So, I mean, it's a far cry from 6% we used to get for a year 5 or 6 years ago. That's the way it is. So I'll take any questions, and hopefully I can answer them.
Right, thank you, Mr. Wells. And I just commented under commentary that you expect a surplus, operating surplus for the year by the time we get to the end of June, the end of the financial year. So that's, you say it's better than expected. So, right, so any questions on there? And on page 21, points there, 22.
Just going back to page 21.
Yep.
And this is direct to our Mayor. Gary, the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, what does that mean to the district?
The funding that we've got, $250,000 for a pilot to get young people, particularly needs those not in education, or training, to get them into work. So the target is to get 25 NEETs into work. Period of time is relatively short, 3 months. But what it will mean is the opportunity for the council working alongside a number of different agencies already in the community to focus on those opportunities of, and match young people to employers, and take what is a bit of a problem area for central government and actually, all go well, get some really good results, which mean turn these young people into contributing members of the community. They've got some a really positive pathway for the future. But overall, really good outcomes, and we're dealing with the four well-beings as council. This is a good example of how we can deal with those.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor King. That's good information provided. So 21, page 22. Any further comments on the questions on the points? Yep, Councillor Personal.
Yeah, Ian, under expenditure, under budget, we've got whilst wages and salaries are close to budget, overhead recoveries are lower than budget, but personal costs exceed budget. What personal costs? Explain that.
So personnel costs are associated with staff, so it's wages and salaries, and it's KiwiSaver and other incidentals, but we offset against that the recoveries of those people against capital projects. So people in the roading, waters, yeah. Now, when there are staff vacancies in those departments, we can't fully recover. Yeah, so although we're not paying those staff, we're not recovering them at a slightly higher rate anyway.
Yeah.
So it's a big balancing act. I'm sorry, it's just, it's smoke and mirrors, but
Right, and net depreciation and finance costs, statement of financial position. Yeah, so we go some comments made there about, I think we're quite self-explanatory. Next page 23, investments and other entities, comment, loans to other entities, trades, employment, entitlements, short-term borrowings. No questions, comments on those things. Okay, moving on to page 24. A list there of capital expenditure, which is to date is 18.03 million, below the annual plan year-to-date budget of 24.25 million. And the variations there as to which ones are above or below budget. So every year council does carry forward does prepare a carry forward report of work which has been approved in the current year but not completed, is carried forward to the following year. So I'm assuming, Mr. Wells, those items there that are not completed at this stage, if not completed, they'll be included in the carry forward report to go forward to next.
if the relevant managers request that those projects are carried forward, then yes, it doesn't automatically happen
Okay.
for every project. It happens automatically for some grant funding and some things that we do automatically carry forward. But when it comes to capital projects, I do rely on managers saying, yes, I want to carry that forward, and the amount I want to carry forward is X dollars.
Yeah, certainly if the contract is not going to be completed, then it's
I can't,
not carried forward.
there is no point.
Impact of COVID-19, then we go on to the actual, onto page 25, which is the performance, is the statement, financial report statement of comprehensive income and expense. Showing income for the 9 months, 42 million is ahead of the budget. It was 40.7 million. A list down the right-hand side of the variances. Mayor Kircher?
Just a question on the rent holidays that have been due to COVID. Showing $140,000 cut in revenue on that sort. Do officers have any comment on how effective that's been as far as sure that people are looked after and businesses survive, etc.?
I'd probably need Ms. Julia's here to answer that question, but I think generally the feedback from tenants has been positive about the impact that has had on them and their ability to continue. A lot of it was in both at the airport, obviously. NZAA has had a reduced number of students, and that's had an impact on their business and some of the other aspects out there. I think the other big area was down in the historic precinct. You know, it was can be quite difficult to tenant, and you know, they're something again. Feedback from the Civic Trust, been very positive about the impact that it's had.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so if we can move on to the next page, 26. Comprehensive, that's the expenses. Expenses as per the year, 43.8 million, budget was 44.2, so not a very big variation at all. Some comments on the right-hand side as to the variations, no questions. All right, so we end up with a share of, with a surplus at this point in time, a deficit of 1.876 compared to a deficit on budget of 3.519. Mr. Wells has already highlighted it's a good result, better result than is expected for the 9 months. And then on to page 27, which is the actual statement of financial position. And there are no major variations there, so no questions. All right. Appendix B, Treasury report. And highlighting the cash flows for the year, outgoings and sources of funds. And on the top of page 30, there are some, at the end of March, there were $3 million invested, $3 million invested in term deposits. And other investments are scheduled there, other investments made by council, North Otago Irrigation Company, Observatory Retirement Village, Duntroon, Whitestone Civic Trust, Airline Academy, and Waitaki District Health Services Limited. So, no questions, okay. Yeah, Mayor Kircher.
Just there's a dividend showing in April 2022. Has that been received already this year for the last financial year? Nothing. I didn't know whether it had been received.
We received the Whitestone dividend very early April. No, on the 31st of March.
Right.
Yes, we received it into our bank account, and you see it in the
30th of April one.
It was declared in March. I'm sorry, it arrived in April, and I've recorded it in March because they declared it in March.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Yeah. So just going on to the next page, the external borrowings. There's this chart of the borrowings from the Local Government Funding Authority. Total $15 million at the time. You'll note it's spread over the first one, CP, is commercial paper, and there's floating rate notes, FRN, and goes on to floating rate bonds. So just a comment there, Mr. Wells, the bonds are the lowest rate of interest, well, apart from the commercial paper is lower, but bonds are a lower rate of interest than the floating rate notes.
Yes, yes, and Bancorp have made the point that we are the council in New Zealand with the lowest rates. Never seen
rates of
as
interest
low
on
as
borrowing.
I'm sorry.
The lowest rates of interest being paid on borrowers.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, which is quite astounding. Even when we rolled the commercial paper, which is currently 0.55, the original rate on that was 0.545 or something in that regard. It moved very little.
Right.
So long may that continue. And that goes back again to this Treasury strategy where I've based the additional cost of borrowing on 1%, but I seriously doubt that we will incur a cost of 1%. It's just there really to show that I'm not being too positive.
I'm an accountant to be conservative, Mr.
Yes.
Mr. Neil.
And if to the point of view going short and curve, it would be lower now, but to your point before the chair, if you went out and tried to reborrow these loans now with the long curve going up, I think bonds will be more expensive.
I would imagine so. I'm meeting with our advisor next week, actually. So that's a question I could.
Sorry, that's actually illustrated on page 37 of their report.
So the longer
yes.
the curve, the longer end of the curve is rallying.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes, I'm moving on. So there's a report, Treasury report from Bancorp, the local government financial advisors for council. And they go through quite a few pages and state quite a bit of information, background information to the financial market. And as Mr. Wells commented, they do state that in the local authorities that the Bancorp acts for, the interest being paid by Ōtaki District Council is the lowest cost of funds for any local authority sector that Bancorp Treasury is aware of. So that's a very, very advantageous bond. So anybody got any questions on the Bancorp report? Or?
I think couldn't arrange to have Bancorp here because usually they like to be available and provide the quarterly report. But given that we'll be looking at the strategy both for the first quarter and probably also having a view across the year at the next meeting, we'll try and make sure that they're available for that meeting. So I think that might reproduce this report in the next agenda so that you can direct any questions to them rather than myself or Mr. Wells sort of fumble around for an answer.
Yep, Councillor
Yeah, contrary to my previous comment earlier at the meeting, Chair, maybe we should be borrowing more than 25. I just had enough. Sort of tongue in cheek comment, Chair.
Yes, indeed. No, taking into account Mr. Neil's comments, the rate may well increase during the yield curve moving up, but it still is very, very low cost of borrowing, isn't it? So it's very advantageous for council. Right, page 43 is Appendix D, the internal loan balances. Showing the movements in the period and just showing down below schedule of the majority of where the money has been spent, mainly on the new water reservoir, up at Reservoir Road. And then the Appendix E, special funds and reserves balances. No big variation. Mayor Kircher?
Just a small query, really. As we're looking to basically go out consulting on the sports and events centre and whether we potentially contribute 10 million, which I think actually might be a bit less than that, but say 10 million. If we were to put $1 or $1.5 million in from the RMA Reserves Fund, which is just sitting there, how would that impact on rates? Positive?
Well, any use of reserves is positive, but it's still got to come out of the one bank account. So we would, if we don't have money or even pledges are difficult to spend, you've got to spend money before you get pledges on occasions. It's all going to come out of the same pot. So I suspect that once we kick the project off, coupled with the large number of other capital projects that are in the pipeline, if they're all approved, if the LTP is adopted as it is now, then we will probably need to borrow more about 12 months from now.
Yeah, I guess it's what the impact on rates is, because it all comes out of one pot, but how it gets into the pot is very different.
Yeah, no, it is possible, as we did in order to achieve a zero rate increase in the current year, to carefully and cleverly use reserves to facilitate our ultimate aim.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wells. So going back to the recommendation, the Performance Audit and Risk Committee receives and notes the information. Would someone like to move that recommendation? Councillor Roby, seconded Councillor Holding. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Clear that carried. So that brings us to the end of our public part of our meeting. So I'd like now someone to move that the meeting goes into public excluded. Move Councillor Kingham, seconded Councillor McRoby. All in favour, please say aye. Against? Clear that carried. So thank you to those online for their interest in today's meeting. That will now cease the public broadcast of today's meeting, and we'll take a break. We'll go into our public excluded part of the meeting. So thank you for your interest.